In this video, I will demonstrate how to use debug mode in a React application which has a small bug. So we will take a look at two approaches on how to fix it. The first and most commonly used approach, especially in the front-end applications, where you just put console logs all over the code base, and then you will try to figure out what seems to be the issue there. After that, we will go through the same process, but with debug mode. In the end, we should clearly see why debug mode is much more efficient and powerful compared to just using log statements. So let's get started. As a side note, I will be using WebStorm editor here, and all the code in this video can be accessed at GitHub link in the video description. So let's quickly implement a simple React application which will fetch users and to-dos data, store them in the local state, and then display them. Data will be managed using the useState hook, and the useEffect hook will be utilized to fetch this data from freely available fake APIs. After that, there is a function that calculates productivity score for each user based on how many to-dos a given user has completed. And then finally, all of this comes together in the JSX, where we display data about users and to-dos. So we can take a look at how this application is working when we run npm start in the terminal and take a look at the browser. We can see that we have data about users and to-dos, and everything seems to be in order except for this productivity score. So to find out what seems to be the issue here, we can start by adding console logs in the code. So let's put them after we fetch data and convert the data into a JavaScript object. We can put one log statement here and another one here. And when we take a look at the browser's console, we can see that we have 10 users and 200 to-dos, and everything seems to be correct at this point. Let's also put logs in this productivity score function, but we need to slightly modify this function since it evaluates an expression in the end. We can just store this in a variable, and then we can log out this partial result and also this complete result. So let's head to the browser once again, and now we can see this partial result and this final result for each user. And it seems like the multiplication and division should be swapped. So let's switch them, and in the browser we can see that now this productivity score is fixed. So this was how we would approach inspecting the application with console logs. Okay, so and now for the debug mode, we will have the same starting point as we did when we used console logs. So we want to take a closer look at this data fetching process. And to do that, we can put a breakpoint at the beginning of this useEffect hook by just clicking on the cutter in the editor. And now the application will pause at this point, and we can access variables at this point in time. To go into debug mode, we start the application like we would normally by running npm start. But now we will hold Ctrl-Shift and then click on this localhost address, which will start this application in debug mode. And as we can already see, the application's execution is paused currently in this line. And now in the browser, we can actually see it really is paused here. So the main hotkey here is F8, which will basically step forward by one line in this application's execution flow. So when we press F8, we go to the next line, and next line. And we have access to these variables here. So we have users data as we saw before when we used log statements. And also when we step forward again, this to-dos data got evaluated, and we can also inspect it here. It seems that this data is correct. So we can then let this application continue its normal flow, and we can do it by pressing F9 key. F9 will let the application run until it reaches the next breakpoint. But since we only have one breakpoint here, it will continue running until it has no more necessary actions to do. So when we press F9, it will run through all this code here, and it will display this data on the screen. And we can see users data and to-dos data. Also, this productivity score doesn't quite seem right. To inspect it closer, we can again put a breakpoint at the beginning of this productivity score function. And to go here, we can just reload the browser, but it still goes to this useEffect hook part of the code, since it runs first. And as mentioned before, we can go to the next breakpoint by pressing F9. We can go through this function with F8. And now we are at this return line, but since it evaluates an expression here, We can't quite see what is happening in here, but debug mode has got just the right tool for it. So what we can do is just select this and then press Alt and F8, which brings up an evaluation window where we can evaluate expressions. When we evaluate this, we get this number here, which is not quite right. We can remove some code from this expression and we can see how this final expression got calculated. So, and now upon closer inspection, we can again see that we should swap this multiplication and division. And when we evaluate this again, the percentage is correct now. So we can then copy and then paste this evaluation to replace the current one. And now when we press F9 again, we go back here. So that is because this productivity score gets calculated once per each user. And since we have multiple users, we are kind of stuck in this function. But to get out of it, we can just remove this breakpoint here by clicking on it. And now when we press F9 again, the application will run through all the code again. And as we can see, now these percentages are correct. And one extra thing that I want to point out here is that you can also put breakpoints in the JSX. So when we reload the browser and go to those breakpoints, we can also very closely investigate what is going on in here. We can inspect the variables that are present here and also see how the code gets executed step by step. This can be really handy in scenarios where you need to dive really deep into an issue to figure out what is wrong. And that was about it for the debug mode. These are only the basic functionalities that debug mode has, but they are most often used. Now, I also want to summarize why debug mode is better. First, we didn't have to clutter the code with console logs. Secondly, we didn't have to modify a function just because we wanted to print out what is happening in there. And thirdly, maybe most importantly, we also saw how debug mode can be used to really dissect what is happening to the application and carefully go through its execution flow to get a better understanding. These are the hotkeys that were used in this video, and you can also access them in the video description below. So maybe you could try them out by yourself the next time you try to use debug mode with React. Thanks for watching.